When I was growing up in the UK, everybody knew these names: Cobra, Lightning, Wolf, and Jet. So will it be the same for my kids with names like Steel and Fury? The return of the well-known TV show Gladiators brings with it a familiar face to those of us in the CrossFit community, as the recently announced Gladiator Steel is none other than Zack George. And while this is incredible news for Zack, and potentially very good news for CrossFit in general, it does of course bring an end to his team's CrossFit Games season. So despite an incredible performance during quarterfinals, they will not be able to head to Berlin for the semifinals. Now, looking at comments and reactions on social media, we are seeing very mixed opinions, which is understandable as there are a number of factors involved. And there are two quite big issues that people keep bringing up that I will address towards the end of the video. But I think an important thing for us to remember is that it's very easy to say what we would do in a hypothetical situation, but of course it's very different when it's not hypothetical, but a reality. But first things first, no one can deny what an incredible opportunity this is for Zack George. Quite some time ago I made a video about whether or not in CrossFit it's better to be good or popular. And we have to remember that being CrossFit famous and being mainstream media famous are two very different things. And I think this clip probably sums it up best.
Hey, do you know who Brent Fikowski is?
Fikowski?
Yeah, CrossFit guy.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, have a good day.
Okay.
All right. Sorry.
Is he like a hockey player? Or?
No, CrossFit guy.
Oh.
CrossFit athlete. No?
Hey,
Do you know who Brent Fikowski is?
look at me! Look at me! Ah!
Do you know who Brent Fikowski is?
Nope.
No. That's totally fine, man.
Yeah.
No? Okay. Sorry. It's like, that's perfect. Thank you. That's the life, right? Nobody knows the guy who came second place.
Brent Fikowski stands up with his 5 bar. And Brent Fikowski, look at this. Brent Fikowski.
Now, of course, there are no guarantees, but if Gladiators reaches anywhere near the size and popularity that it had back in the 90s, well, it's going to be a lot more people than just those in the CrossFit community that know the name Zack George, or at least the name Steel. But hold on. For this incredible opportunity, hasn't he betrayed his team? Didn't he make a commitment to that team and he's now let them down in the last minute? Well, we will talk about that team in a minute. But we have to remember that Zack also made another commitment, a commitment to a different team, arguably a more important commitment. And if you don't know the team I'm talking about, it is of course Samantha and baby Ivy. So just try and factor that in if you're putting yourself in Zack's shoes and making this decision. Do I take that guaranteed paycheck from Gladiators, something that can help me support my family, set them up for better things in the future? Or do I roll the dice? Do I go to semi-finals and see what happens? There are no guarantees in CrossFit. And that's actually something important to remember because people are talking about Zack costing them their opportunity to go to the games. But let's remember that so far the only guarantee they have is semi-finals. And yes, they performed very well in quarterfinals, but that doesn't guarantee you a spot at the CrossFit Games. Now, don't get me wrong, still missing out on semi-finals, especially considering how much work has gone into it up until now, is still terrible. And I have spoken to the majority of the team, and I must say I'm incredibly impressed with how well they are handling the situation. In fact, it seems that other people are getting more upset and more worked up about the situation than they are. And before we jump in with the idea of, well, it only actually affects those people, so why is anyone else even allowed to get upset? There are reasons that people can be very disappointed about this. For example, I've known Crouchy for quite a while. I've actually seen her throw down a number of times. So maybe this was it. I wanted to go to Berlin. I wanted to cheer her on as a friend. And now she's not going to be there. But as a general CrossFit fan, I'm going to know a majority of the athletes that are competing in Berlin, and I'm going to have a good time anyway. But what if you're just a friend or family member of one of the members of the team? You don't really care about CrossFit, but you care about that person. And because of that, you're going out to cheer them on doing the thing they love. So what does that mean? It means going out to Berlin, plane tickets, hotels, getting tickets for semifinals. Also, you can cheer on that person who's now not going to be there. well, maybe they'll decide to go anyway, and perhaps we get a new CrossFit fan, who knows. And speaking of, while some might view Zack's decision as a selfish one, where he is the only person benefiting, could it actually be that this benefits CrossFit in general? Back in the day, if you were a fan of Cobra or Jet, you didn't know anything beyond that on-screen persona. But we live in the age of social media. With a couple of clicks, if someone is a fan of Steel, they're going to learn about Zack George, and by extension, very quickly, they're going to discover CrossFit. So could this expose a whole new group of people to CrossFit? And how many of them may then start doing it themselves? I actually spoke to Danny Spiegel on this matter because, yes, when she did Titan Games, of course, that blew up her social media profile and she got a whole load of new followers. But she also had a lot of people telling her that this is why they started doing CrossFit. So it's not a stretch then to assume that Gladiators, together with Zack George, could actually get a whole new group of people doing CrossFit. But at the start of the video, I did mention two big issues that people are talking about, and I want to address them now. So the first is, well, why didn't Zack tell the team in advance? And the second is, why didn't they have an alternate or a backup, especially if he knew he might not be able to continue the season? Well, the first is probably the easiest to address, and that is that he was under embargo by the BBC. He was not allowed to tell anyone anything about what was happening with Gladiators. In fact, as soon as he could say something, he did tell his team in advance. So they had a little bit of a heads up, not just before he announced it to the world, but maybe more importantly, before Gladiators announced it to the world. And one of the teammates did tell me that they really did appreciate having that little bit of a heads up just to get their mind straight before the rest of the world found out. And even now, there's still information that is not allowed to be revealed by Zack or even by Gladiators themselves. I actually reached out, and while they did reply, there were a few questions I asked that I was just told, this information is not public at the moment and cannot be shared. Because I was also curious as to how many people actually tried out to become a gladiator. Because again, there's this idea of, well, Zack knew this was going to happen. He knew when he tried out for it. But generally in TV, just because you try out for a role doesn't guarantee you get it, especially if there's a lot of people trying for that same role. Unfortunately, that information isn't available, so I don't know how many people he had to beat in order to get his place as one of the gladiators. But maybe in the future we'll find out. But then that actually leads nicely into the next point, doesn't it? Because even if he knew it was just a slim chance, should they not have had an alternate on their team? Because if they'd had someone who could sub in now for Zack, well then their game season wouldn't have ended prematurely. They could have still gone to Berlin to compete with that alternate. So this is something I asked both Zack and other members of the team, because I did find it strange, considering how many people have sat out this season alone due to injury. Even if we took away the whole Gladiators thing, it is strange for a team not to have that alternate in place. But I was told from both sides that it was a mutual decision among the team to not have alternates, even to the point that if someone did get injured, they knew they would be sitting out the season. Now, of course, admittedly, with Zack's knowledge that he had that maybe no one else had, he could have pushed a little bit harder for an alternate. But even then, how easy would that have been to find for their team? Because you need to find someone who is, first of all, fit enough to be on the team, but then is not committed to any other team, is willing to come down and do all the workouts at your gym so they can be an alternate. They're not planning to go individual. They're happy to more or less sit out their season just in case someone on your team can't make it. Or alternatively, you lower the barrier of entry. You find someone who's maybe not quite as fit as the rest of your team. But then what happens? Because we saw this in sanctionals, didn't we? Where people were able to bring in a ringer to help them qualify for the games, but they had no intention of being at the games because they were probably competing as an individual. Maybe they'd already got their ticket as an individual to the games. And then what happened when those teams eventually made it? Well, they just could not perform the same without that person, could they? And it wasn't a good experience. So yes, maybe they could have had someone on as an alternate and they still get to go to Berlin now. But if the fitness just isn't there, that's not going to be a good experience for them. Of course, someone could still say, well, if they couldn't find an alternate, maybe they should have all gone individual. Zack knew that this was a chance and he's let them down. But again, how much of a chance was it? At what point did he know maybe how far through the process he was and how realistic it was to get this? It does seem like a dream job, and they don't always come around that often. But of course, no matter how we feel about the situation, it's not going to change what has happened. So really, all we can hope for is the best. We can hope that Zack does well on Gladiators, that it brings in more people to CrossFit, and we see the sport grow because of it. We can look to the individual members of the team. What are their plans for 2024? Well, they're going to be able to make a head start now, and we know that overcoming adversity only makes people stronger. Although even after saying all of this, if I find out that Lucy Campbell has been faking her wrist injury and is announced as the next Gladiator, I am going to start having trust issues.